Let's do something different from another angle. There are always two sides to any coin, or two faces to any coin. So let's look at the biblical scriptures from a non-Jewish, non-Christian, non-Islamic perspective, point of view, and so forth, from those ancient church fathers and so on, and whoever else it leads up to. This was published, the Gospel according to the Jews and Pagans, the historical character of the Gospel, established from non-Christian sources, by Samuel Stokes, edited by the Reverend J.O.F. Murray D.D., Master of Selwyn College, Cambridge, England. Printed around 1913. Printed and published, or published and printed. Editor's preface to the English edition. We found this particular book in the public domain, public access, so we don't believe it'll incur us a copyright claim, strike, or other. Editor's preface to the English edition. This book had been put into the hands of this author to see through the press for English readers. It was originally published by the Christian Literature Society for India at Madras. It was the work of an American who had given his life to the evangelization of India. He was not a professional scholar or student of the classics, but he had managed to collect practically all the most important passages bearing on his subject, and to put them together in a striking and original way. His object in making the collection is clearly stated, or was clearly stated by himself in the general preface. In India, the publication was meant in the first instance to help educated Hindus to feel that the life of Christ and the facts of the early development of Christianity entered into the mainstream of the history of the Roman Empire and were capable of verification by the same evidence as that of the generally accepted facts of that history, and that in consequence they stood as facts on a very different ground from the legends of Krishna. What success attended it in the land where it first saw light, and it is difficult to say. The Hindu philosophy does not train men to attach the same importance to historical fact that we do in the West. The author was glad, however, to learn that a second edition was already required for Indian consumption or use. There is no doubt, however, that the work itself would appeal. There was no doubt, however, that the work would itself appeal directly to Western intellectuals' needs. They could never be able to retain their hold on any creed which is cut adrift from its connection with historic fact, and as long as there was any minds who refused to credit, however unreasonably, a Christian's testimony to the facts of his own religion, there was real value in an appeal to the Gospel according to the Jews and Pagans. This particular book. This author's work consisted of, for the most part, in verifying the references, revising the translations of the selected extracts, and supplying, in the case of Pliny the Younger, a more recent account of the writer than that originally given, because Mommsen's researches had resulted in a new chronology which affected the date of his correspondence with the Emperor Trajan. J.O.F. Murray, Selwyn College Lodge, Cambridge, 28 August 1912. General preface. Many Christians, and almost all non-Christians, seem to be under the impression that the credibility of early church history, and even the historical reality of Christ himself, rests entirely upon the evidence of the early Christian community, from the disciples, the apostles, etc. The author himself had often been asked how he knew that such a person as Christ, or Jesus the Christ, ever really existed. He had even heard the gospel narrative spoken of as a legend, the fruit of superstition or credulity. It's only fair, he states, to give everything its due. Our faith in Christ as the incarnate Word of God is, the author admitted, founded upon a spiritual experience begotten of faith, and upon a belief in the authenticity of the four Gospels and the accounts contained in them. A discussion of these and similar questions does not come within the scope of this little book. It is written with one object, and that is to demonstrate from other than Christian sources that the record of Christ crucified under Pontius Pilate in the days of the high priests Annas and Caiaphas is history. To prove further that in the first century after his death, men and women of all ranks and various nationalities worshipped him as God and died rather than deny him. They went to their death as martyrs, believing in him. In order to prove these points, the author had not turned for help to the New Testament or to the writings of the fathers of the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Christian era, but had obtained information from the writings of a famous Roman government official, or Roman government officials, a Greek satirist, and a Jewish historian who was also a Pharisee. All these men were living within less than 100 years of the time when Christ was executed. Far from being Christians, they were either persecutors of the church or despised and scoffed at its members. The subject will be dealt with, or was dealt with, as follows. In section 1, important passages from several famous non-Christian writers will be quoted, and evidence contained in them will be discussed. In section 2, the facts ascertained by a study of the passages given in section 1 will be collected and woven into a connected narrative which will be entitled The Gospel According to Jews and Pagans. In the appendix, 2 passages will be considered which, on account of their later date, the author had not thought advisable to introduce into the body of the book. It was hoped by the author, however, that no one would fail to read this appendix, as it contains much that is both interesting and important. Of course, the information which the author, etc., could obtain from their witnesses would only be a bare outline of the gospel story. Of course, the information which we can obtain from our witnesses will only be a bare outline of the gospel story. No reasonable person could ask for more from those who took no interest in the Christian religion and only referred to its followers in the course of the discussion of other matters. These men looked on the Christians as a sect of religious fanatics. It is therefore not likely that they would regard them as anything but a problem, or that they would take the trouble to examine their creed. And yet the thoughtful reader will perceive that such evidence is more valuable than anything more direct would be. Better witnesses could hardly have been chosen, for they are all of them men of weight in the world of letters. They're known to recognise their popular in that day, and 2 of them famous as historians. Possibly those who doubt the authenticity of the Christian records will give ear to Pliny, Tacitus, Lucian, and Josephus, who, whatever they were not followers of Christ. In conclusion, the author wished to say that nothing in this book, the author says that there's nothing in this book which is new or newly set forth by him. It has all been said, and much better said before. The only difficulty is that the works in which such information may be found are too expensive to be within the reach of any except those who are willing to spend largely on books, and so elaborate that few could afford the time to read them. Yes, we have heard that there are books out there that you really need to read, but they can cost you from anything from $300 to $3,000, etc. But there are ways around that. Moreover, there is not, the author thought, any single work in which all the passages here within this book are given with their text are to be found. Had such a book been put in his own hands at a time when he did not believe in Jesus Christ, it would have been a great help to him. It was his hope and prayer that this may have been a help to some inquirer then and now, today. It may make those who read it feel that this, or our Christian religion, which has exercised such a vast influence over the history of the world, is itself beyond all doubt founded upon history, and therefore demands our most careful and earnest consideration. The historical character of the Gospel, section 1. References in secular literature. We shall begin section 1 with a quotation from the works of Caius Cornelius Tacitus, statesman and historian. He's a great orator as well, apparently. We have the book from Reader's Digest on Tacitus, the histories and his annals. He was a boy of 9 when Rome was burned and would therefore clearly remember the event and the circumstances attending it. Accounts of him are to be found in all encyclopedias and Roman histories. The following, though brief, is all that we need insert here. Tacitus, a celebrated Roman historian, was born about AD 55. The events of his early life are not recorded. He entered the public service in the reign of Vespasian, AD 69 to 79, and married a daughter of C. Julius Agricola, the famous general, in AD 78. He was an intimate friend of Pliny the Younger, from whose letters we derive a large part of the knowledge which we have of his life. In the year 88, he obtained the office of praetor, or possibly like prefect, something like that. He was one of the most eloquent orators of his time. In the reign of Nerva, he became consul, AD 97. His reputation is chiefly found upon his annals, annales, in 16 books, which record the history of the Roman Empire from the death of Augustus, AD 14, to the death of Nero, AD 68. In the following passages, Tacitus is speaking of the burning of Rome, AD 64, and commenting upon Nero's method of turning public suspicion from himself. He writes, Annals 1544. So, to stifle the report, Nero put in his own place as culprits and punished with every refinement of cruelty the men whom the common people hated for their secret crimes. They called them Christians, because what these Christians did, they went into the temples of Diana, etc., and smashed all the idols, artifacts, etc. They went on a rampage. And some Romans of the Senate, etc., started to moan, but they were told, well, just leave them alone. And then eventually they pushed it until Christianity became illegal, and these people were rounded up and persecuted. And then Constantine, sometime later, makes it all legal, becomes a so-called Christian, who's actually Christian pagan, and the Christians had their day for a while there. So to stifle the reports, Nero put in his own place as culprits and punished with every refinement of cruelty the men whom the common people hated for their secret crimes. They called them Christians. Christos, etc., which came from the Greek. Romans borrowed this word from the Greeks, which meant, in their mindset, slaves to the Christos. And the 12 disciples, etc., didn't like that being called or labelled a Christian by pagans, or from a Roman pagan church. So they, speaking Galilean Aramaic, decided to call themselves Mashiachai in their language, Galilean Aramaic, or Galilean, which means followers of the Messiah, or the Mashiach. So these people were hated, they were called Christians. Christ, from whom the name was given, had been put to death in the reign of Tiberius by the procurator Pontius Pilate, and the pestilence superstition checked for a while. It was knocked down for a while. Afterward it began. And here it is in the Latin. It's a translation of it in the Latin, from the Latin. Here's some footnotes here. The numbers in brackets correspond with the numbers inserted from time to time in section 2. 2. We know from Roman history that the Emperor Tiberius died in what we would reckon now as AD 37. Within less than a year before the death of Tiberius, Pontius Pilate gave up his office in Judea after having tarried there 10 years. Josephus, Antiquities, Book 18, Chapter 4:2. And set out for Rome to defend himself against certain charges made against him. Hence, he must have been appointed procurator of Judea in what we now reckon as AD 26 to 27, and must have held that post until AD 36-37. To break out afresh, not only in Judea, where the mischief first arose, but also at Rome, where all sorts of murder and filthy shame meet together and become fashionable. In the first place, then some were seized and made to confess. Then on their information, a vast multitude were convicted, not so much of arson as of hatred of the human race, and they were not only put to death, but put to death with insults, in that they were dressed up in the skins of beasts to perish by the warring of dogs, or else put on crosses to be set on fire, and when the daylight failed, to be burned for use as lights by night. And you can find that information in Fox's book of Martyrs. And then again, here is the Latin, translated from the Latin into the English. This passage is very famous. All scholars, Christians and non-Christians, agree that it is truly from the pen of Tacitus. 1. Suetonius, writing some years later, AD 120, says of this event, the Christians, a kind of men given to a new and criminal superstition, were put to death with grievous torments. That's from On the Life of the Caesars, Nero 16. And also see Lightfoot S. Clement, it might be St. Clement or something, of Rome, Volume 1, page 75, N.3. Histories dealing with the period of the early Roman emperors are based upon his Annals, that's Tacitus' Annals. Let us examine the passage quoted above, or quoted. In it we shall find that Tacitus makes us acquainted with the following facts. 1. In the reign of Tiberius there was a Roman procurator called or named Pontius Pilate. 2. At his hands one Christ was executed. 3. This Christ was the founder of the sect of the Christians. 4. Christianity originated in Judea. 5. It spread quickly to Rome. 6. It made converts so rapidly that at the time of the burning of Rome, the portion of the Christian community captured in that city could be spoken of as a vast multitude. It's a footnote indication below. As we have shown in a previous note, page 2, Pontius Pilate entered upon his office as procurator of Judea in AD 26 or 27. Now, the burning of Rome took place, according to Roman historians, in what we should now reckon as AD 64. Supposing even that Christ had been put to death in the first year of Pilate's administration, the burning of Rome could not have taken place more than 37 years after this event. It was in such a short space of time, or even less, that Christianity had spread from a distant province to the seat of the empire. Again, 6. It made converts so rapidly that at the time of the burning of Rome, the portion of the Christian community captured in that city could be spoken of as a vast multitude. It is hardly possible that the great historian could have been misinformed. He was writing about matters with which he was intimately acquainted, and about the affairs of an empire in which he had held the highest office under the emperor, that of consul. In all other questions, his statements are accepted as authoritative, and none but the most thoughtless would venture to dispute his statements regarding the spread of the Christian sect. Moreover, it must be remembered that Tacitus was not dealing with affairs which had happened hundreds of years before his time. Under such circumstances a mistake would have been more possible, but he was writing of comparatively recent events, some of which had taken place during his own lifetime and even before his eyes. Add to this that his position as consul gave him access to all the judicial records and provincial reports, and it will be easy to understand that for him to be mistaken in such matters would be well nigh impossible. So yeah, he does say in his book of histories that he knew of the execution of Christ by his procurator, Pilate, at the time. So that's probably how he knew, because he's looking at those judicial records. Our second witness, Pliny the Younger, was a friend of Tacitus. The following account of him is abridged, so it's probably edited, from the article in the last edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica, which has been around 255 years or so. Publius Caecilius Secundus, later known as Gaius Plinius Caecilius Secundus, AD 61 to 113, Latin author of the letters and the panegyric on Trajan, was the second son of Lucius Cecilius Silo by Plinia, the sister of etc. etc. He reached he was, after a distinguished official career, he was selected by Trajan as governor of Bithynia under the special title of legate procurator with consul power. He reached Bithynia in September held office for 15 months or more, and probably died in 113. Among his friends were Tacitus and Suetonius. We possess 9 books of Pliny's letters and a separate book containing his correspondence with Trajan. This correspondence supplies us with many interesting details as to the government of Bithynia and as to the relations between the governor and the central authority. It reflects the greatest credit on the strict and almost punctilious conscientiousness of the governor and on the assiduity and the higher principles which animated the emperor. Of these letters we here quote the famous one to the emperor Trajan bearing upon the treatment of Christians. It was written while Pliny was governor of Bithynia, and in the collection is the 97th of the 10th book. And here's the Latin, the English and the Latin. It is my custom, Lord Emperor, to refer to you all questions whereof I am in doubt. Who can better guide me when I am at a stand, or enlighten me if I am in ignorance? In the investigation of Christians, I have never taken part, hence I do not know what is the crime usually punished or investigated, or what allowances are made. So I have had no little uncertainty whether there is any distinction of age, or whether the very weakest offenders are treated like the stronger, whether pardon is given to those who repent, or whether nobody who has ever been a Christian at all gains anything by having ceased to be such, whether punishment attaches to the mere name apart from secret crimes, or to the secret crimes connected with the name Jesus the Christ. Meanwhile, this is the course I have taken with those accused before me as Christians. I asked at their own lips whether they were Christians, and if they confessed, I asked them a second and a third time with threats of punishment. If they kept to it, I ordered them to execution, for I held no question that whatever it was that they admitted, in any case, obstinacy and unbending perversity deserved to be punished. There were others of the like insanity, but as these were Roman citizens, I noted them down to be sent to Rome. Roman citizens would be trialed and punished by Romans. Everybody else by these guys, right? In the course of the proceedings, as is often the case, the mere fact that the charge was taken notice of made it commoner, and several distinct causes arose. As unsigned paper was presented, which gave the names of many. As for those who said that they neither were nor ever had been Christians, I thought it's right to let them go when they recited a prayer to the gods at his dictation, or my dictation, made supplication with incense and wine to your statue, which I had ordered to be brought into court for the purposes, together with the images of the gods, and moreover cursed Christ, not one of which things, so it is said, can those who are really Christians be made to do. Others, who were named by the informer, said that they were Christians and then denied it, explaining that they had been, but had ceased to be such, some 3 years ago, some a good many years, and a few as many as 20. All those two not only worship your statue and images of gods, but curse Christ. They maintained, however, that the amount of their fault or error had been this, that it was their habit on a fixed day to assemble before daylight and sing by turns a hymn to Christ as God or a god, and that they bound themselves with an oath, and footnote indication there. The word translated oath is the sacramento of the Latin text, coming in the letter just before the account of the food which the Christians were in the habit of taking together, or eating together. We probably have in this passage a misunderstood allusion to the Christian sacrament of the Holy Communion. Had the Christians told Pliny that they were accustomed to come together on a fixed day in the early morning to sing hymns to Christ as God, and to take a sacrament, and that they bound themselves to abstain from evil, it would be only natural for the pagan governor, who was entirely ignorant of the Christian rite called the Holy Sacrament, to misunderstand them and associate the word in its current sense of an oath with their assertion that they bound themselves to commit no crime. Had the Christians told Pliny that they were accustomed, etc., etc. Okay, where are we? Okay, so they bound themselves with an oath not to commit any enormity, but to abstain from theft, brigandage, or adultery, not to break their word, and not to deny a deposit when demanded. After this was done, their custom was to depart and meet together again to take food, but ordinary and innocent food. And even this, they said, they had given up doing after the issue of his edict, or this Pliny's decree or law, but by which, in accordance with your commands, I had forbidden the existence of clubs. On this, I considered it the more necessary to find out from 2 maidservants, who were called ministrae, and that by torments how far this was not true, but I discovered nothing else than a perverted and extravagant. Okay, it's got this here about ministrae. It's a Latin word for the Greek diaconoi. The ministry here mentioned without doubt are deacons, or deaconesses, of the church. This office has existed in the Christian church from the earliest times, and it is interesting to find this very ancient reference to it in a pagan writer of such authority. So these women, by the looks of it, had this power to become deaconesses or high priestesses of the church, and it existed in the Christian church from the earliest times. And it was interesting to find this very ancient reference to it in a pagan writer of such authority. And it states here, the above is a letter from the governor of a province to his emperor asking for instructions. It was written in AD 112, less than 90 years after the appointment of Pontius Pilate as procurator of Judea. Herewith we give an extract from the answer of the Emperor Trajan to the above letter. Speaking of the attitude to be taken towards Christians, he says, they are not to be sought out, but if they are accused and convicted, they must be punished, yet with the proviso that whoso denies himself to be a Christian and make the fact plain by his action, that is by worshipping our gods, shall obtain pardon by his repentance, however suspicious his past conduct may have been. So they can turn it back on God, Christ, and pretend to worship the Roman gods, and then be set free, and then go back to what they are doing originally, worshipping Jesus Christ, etc. Well, they don't want to die. Nobody wants to die, so that's a way out. But the shame of it, if someone else knows you, says, no, this guy, he denounced it. He renounced his belief. Can't be trusted. This continued to be the attitude taken by all those emperors who persecuted the church. Everyone was at liberty to save his life by recantation. In the extracts from Pliny, we find evidence upon 4 points. A. The attitude of the Christians towards Christ. B. The attitude of the Christians toward persecution. C. Church customs. D. The spread of Christianity in Bithynia and Pontus. A. The Christians worshipped Christ as God and refused to worship other gods, thus showing that they considered him alone worthy of worship. B. Although repeatedly threatened with death as the reward of disobedience, numbers of Roman citizens and others refused to deny Christ and worship the gods, the Roman gods. Instead, Pliny, by repeating his question 3 times, gave them ample opportunity to save themselves, and only when he could not overcome their unbending perversity, it was according to them, right, the Romans, did he order them to execution. So if you didn't repent and renounce your faith, then you'd be off to be executed, because they considered your Christianity a perversity, an unbending perversity. Of their customs, we hear that they had an appointed day for common worship. In early morning service they sang, antiphonally a hymn to Christ as God, and covenanted together to abstain from all impurity and dishonesty in word and deed. Later in the day they again met to partake of a meal together. D. We learn that Christianity had spread rapidly in Pontus and Bithynia. Scarcely 75 years had elapsed since the death of its founder, Jesus Christ, when the Christian religion had taken such a hold upon these provinces of Rome, etc., that the temples had become deserted and the sacrifices had almost ceased. Everybody decided, dying is fake. Yeah, I'm not into that anymore. This one's better. We're going to go with that one. So they left in droves. Scarcely 75 years had elapsed since the death of its founder, when the Christian religion had taken such a hold upon these provinces that the temples had become deserted and the sacrifices, Roman sacrifices required, etc., had almost ceased. It was not confined to any one class or locality, but had penetrated from the cities to the villages and even into the sparsely populated open country, so that multitudes of people, Roman citizens and Roman subjects, in every rank and of both sexes, were numbered among its adherents or its followers, some of whom had been Christians for as many as 20 years. The next witness was another famous pagan, Lucian of Samosata. In the Dictionary of Biography and Mythology we find this account of him. Lucian, one of the most witty and original Greek writers, was born at Samosata on the Euphrates about AD 100. So he's born in the east. His principal works are dialogues written in pure and elegant Greek on history, mythology, philosophy, and various other subjects. His object appeared to have been to cure men of their prejudices and superstitions and their foolish admiration of philosophic charlatans. His genius is eminently satirical, and his works are remarkably humorous, so he's a bit of a stand-up comedian. But some of them are censured as offensive to morality and religion. The following extract is from Chambers' Encyclopedia. A Semite by race but not by education, a subject of Rome but not a Roman, a writer of Greek but not a Greek by birth, Lucian was by circumstances singularly freed from every tie, prepossession or prejudice which might have stood at all in the way of his deriving the largest possible amount of amusement out of the world. His extensive travels gave him abundant material, and his extensive reading gave him ancient instances to confirm and illustrate his experiences. In a dialogue by this writer entitled The Death of Peregrinus, we find the following sections. And it continues. The extract from Lucian is rich in evidence of a most valuable nature. It tells us A. of Christ and his teaching, B. of the Christians and the attitude toward Christ and toward the world, C. of the scriptures, D. of the church. A. It speaks of the founder of the Christian religion as having been crucified, and says that he met his death in Palestine because of what he taught. B. Of the Christians we learn that they worshipped Christ. There's a footnote underneath. The fact that after the execution of Christ the Christians continue to worship him clearly indicates their belief that, though slain, he was nevertheless living, because he rose again, didn't he? In other words, they believed in a life after death and considered themselves to be worshipping a living Christ. Okay, so for Lucian, this extract, their religion speaks of the founder of the Christian religion as having been crucified, and says that he met his death in Palestine because of what he taught. B. Of the Christians we learn that they worship Christ. They believed that they were all brothers if they did this, and lived according to his laws, at the same time turning away from the worship of other gods. They thought that they would live forever, hence it came about that they looked upon death as a trifling matter, and held property in little esteem, keeping a common purse and giving and taking money without any security. They were extremely active in dealing with any matter which affected their community, and when one of their number was arrested, would follow him even into prison, in their desire to serve and relieve him. C. The Christians had books, and it was the custom of their teachers to expound these and comment upon them. D. Peregrinus first came across the Christians in Palestine. There were also communities of them in some of the cities of Asia. They showed the spirit of brotherhood existing among them by the interest which they took in the welfare of co-religionists, and their desire to help and comfort them, even when they were members of communities situated at a distance from themselves. Evidently, they understood the care of fatherless children, as little orphan children, such as Lucian mentions, could not support themselves, especially by ministering to people in prison. The reference to the service of aged widows will be understood by all who recall 1 Timothy verse 9 to 10. Let none be enrolled as a widow under 60 years old, maybe that's under 30 years old, having been the wife of one man, well reported for good works. If she hath brought up children, if she hath used hospitality to strangers, if she hath relieved the afflicted, if she hath diligently followed every good work. We shall call upon one more non-Christian witness in this section. It is the famous Jewish historian Josephus. And many theologians, scholars today say, well, he can't really be trusted, or his writings can't, because someone's probably added to it, because it appears that there's a different style to Josephus' style. So he's not reliable. That's up to you at the end of the day, whether you believe he is or he isn't. Josephus, who was born at Jerusalem AD 37. When the Jews rose in insurrection against the Romans, he was appointed governor of Galilee. Being captured by Vespasian, he was present at the siege of Jerusalem as a prisoner. After the fall of that city, AD 70, he resided at Rome and devoted himself to literary studies. His two most celebrated works are Jewish Antiquities in 20 books and a history of the Jewish War in 7 books, in Hebrew and in Greek. The date of his death is uncertain. We only know that he survived Agrippa III, who died about AD 100. Apparently he was poured into the family of the Flavians, so he was a stepson. So that's why he's called Flavius Josephus, or Josephus Flavius. There are 2 passages in the Antiquities which speak of Jesus Christ, and that is Josephus' Antiquities, book 18, chapter 3, probably paragraph 3, book 20, chapter 9, 1. There are 2 passages in the Antiquities which speak of Jesus Christ, but as the more important of the two is almost certainly an interpolation, and the other probably so, we'll leave them both out of consideration. Nevertheless, that means that someone's probably tampered with it, or someone's retranslated it in a different style to Josephus, or added to it, whatever. Nevertheless, although there is nothing to be found with regards to the Christ, with the exception of the 2 passages just mentioned, we shall find the witness of Josephus valuable in the extreme. Tacitus, Pliny, and Lucian have borne testimony to the fact of the life and death of the Christ, the faith of the Christians, the growth of the church, and the sufferings endured by its members. It falls to Josephus to give us the historical setting of the Gospels and Acts of the Apostles, to show that the state of affairs described in them and the leading Jewish and Roman figures depicted in them were historical and not merely the artistic setting of some cunningly devised fable. So, according to these people, this Christ and his followers existed, and they were a problem afterward to the Romans, or to Rome. So, these leading Jewish and Roman figures depicted in them were historical and not merely the artistic setting of some cunningly devised fable. So those out there say, oh, so it was a fairy tale, he never existed. Well, you are actually wrong, according to these ancient records, these ancient well-known peoples. To quote all passages verbatim will be impossible, as they are very numerous indeed, and Josephus is rather verbose. Doesn't say much about it really. The texts that bear on the subject may be found in the Antiquities, books 13 to 22. But the author was only going to quote 2 passages in full from them. The first great historical figure which meets us in the Gospels is Herod the Great, who sought the young child to destroy him. and, thwarted in this, ordered the massacre of all the babes in Bethlehem. Now, is there a record of that? Actual record? The New Testament notices of him are brief in the extreme, but should any feel a curiosity to know more about this king, let them turn to the Jewish Antiquities by Josephus and read from the 9th chapter of the 14th book to the 8th chapter of the 17th book. There they will learn the character of the man who could order innocent children to be so slain. He was probably losing his mind, right? Well, he strangled his wife, he strangled his son or something like that, all this sort of stuff. They will read of his craft and ferocity. He was like a really great architect, but mad in the head. And the jealousy with which he guarded his crown. Josephus tells how he advanced from murder to murder until even some of his own sons were strangled or otherwise done to death by his order. Maybe he felt they were a threat, or maybe he had an argument with them and didn't like it, so he says, right, that's it, strangle. And how upon his deathbed he ordered the arrest of all the principal men of the entire Jewish nation and left instructions that they should all be slain with darts immediately upon his decease, in order that his funeral might be honoured with the tears of the entire Jewish people. In the remaining chapters of book 17, we learn about the reign of Archelaus, referred to in the first Gospel, Matthew. Accounts are also given of Herod Antipas and how he married Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, during the lifetime of Philip, because Philip was off somewhere else as governor or procurator or something like that in another area. And how Herod, fearing John, that was called John the Baptist, cast him into prison in the castle of Machaerus, because John was saying, Herod, you viper, you committing adultery, playing around with your wife who's not even your wife, it's your brother's wife, all this sort of stuff. Okay, how he married Herodias, and this is Archelaus, right? His brother Philip's wife, well, he's still alive, during the lifetime of Philip, and how Herod, fearing John, that was called the Baptist, cast him into prison in the castle of Machaerus and had him slain there. The following is a text and translation of this important passage. Now, some of the Jews thought that the destruction of Herod's army came from God, and that very justly as a punishment of what he did against John, that was called the Baptist, for Herod slew him, who was a good man, and commanded the Jews, because he probably had a thing for his wife's daughter, his stepdaughter, right? Okay, he was a good man. John was a good man, and commanded the Jews to exercise virtue, both as to righteousness towards one another and piety towards God. This is John again, right? Still John. And so they come to baptism. Now when many came in crowds about him, for they were greatly moved by hearing John's words, Herod, who feared lest the great influence of John that he had over the people might put it in his power and inclination to raise a rebellion, for they seemed ready to do anything he should advise, thought it best by putting him to death to prevent any mischief he might cause, and not bring himself into difficulties by sparing a man who might make him repent. It was too late. Accordingly, he was sent a prisoner out of Herod's suspicious temper to Machaerus, the castle he dissuaded before mentioned, and was on this ground put to death. So, okay, here we go. Josephus also mentions that Herodias had a daughter, Salome. We are told also about Pilate, the procurator of Judea, and concerning all his oppressions and injustices, and how after having held office for 10 years in Judea, he was ordered by Vitellius, the governor of Syria, to proceed to Rome in order to answer the accusations made against him, and how while he was hastening to Rome, the Emperor Tiberius died. As has been before remarked, Tiberius died in what we now reckon as AD 37. Hence, the procuratorship of Pilate must have extended from what would be now reckoned as AD 26 or 27 to AD 36 or 37. He was succeeded, Josephus informs us, after a lapse of time by Felix, who married a Jewess, Drusilla, the sister of Agrippa. An account is also given of the doings of the Egyptian, mentioned in Acts 21:38. which Josephus says took place during the procuratorship of Felix. In Book 20 of the Antiquities, we are told that Porcius Festus was sent by Nero to succeed Felix. There is also a great deal about Herod Agrippa, the Herod of Acts 12. Among other things, an account, Antiquities Book 19, chapter 8:2, of how when he came into the theatre upon a certain occasion, the people began to cry out that he was a god, and how when he did not rebuke them for so speaking, he was immediately attacked by violent pains in the abdomen, and after 5 days died. It will be remembered that an account of this occurrence is also found in the book of Acts 12:20. Maybe the double F is like a comparison or something. The younger Agrippa and his sister Bernice, before whom, according to the right of the Acts, Paul made his defence, are also mentioned by Josephus. I'm not too sure if this Bernice lady actually went and became a Christian. Pretty sure she did. Besides speaking of those who were considered the leading figures in the history of the times, he also informs us concerning the customs of the Jews and the various divisions existing among them. He describes at length the two main divisions, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and speaks of their mutual jealousy. The former, says Josephus, Antiquities Book 18, chapter 1-3, has had a very great influence over the people. He adds, Antiquity Book 13, chapter 10-6, the Pharisees have delivered to the people a great many observances by succession from their fathers, which are not written in the law of Moses. So they were pushing some laws that weren't even Mosaic laws, according to Josephus. Josephus himself was a Pharisee. Okay. Of the Sadducees, he says, Antiquities Book 18, chapter 1-4, the doctrine of the Sadducees is this, that souls die with the bodies. He describes all the festivals of the Jews with great minuteness, and comments upon the great multitudes who assembled at Jerusalem for the Passover. He speaks of the strictness with which the Sabbath was observed by the Jews, probably because of the Pharisees, under the Pharisees, and says that it was not lawful for them to travel far upon that day. You could only go so many feet or a mile or something like that. You could only go a certain distance. It was not lawful for them to travel far upon that day. He mentions a Theudas, though probably this is not the Theudas referred to in the 5th chapter of the Acts of the Apostles by Gamaliel. Also Judas of Galilee, spoken of in the same place. Not the least important information which he gives us is upon the high priesthood of that period. He says that the procurator Valerius Gratus deprived the high priest Annas, the Annas of Luke 3:2, John 18:13-24, of his office, and put in his place one after another 4 Jews, the last of whom was Joseph Caiaphas, the Caiaphas of the Gospels. Having made these changes, Gratus returned to Rome after holding office in Judea 11 years, and Pontius Pilate succeeded him. He took over from him. So there's a footnote here. This, of course, furnishes us with an explanation of the seeming double high priesthood referred to in Luke 3:2 and again implied in John 18:13-24. Annas was the true high priest. Caiaphas, being appointed by the government, was the high priest recognized by the Romans as religious head of the Jewish nation. This being the case, it is easy to see that both would have to be consulted, probably both accounts or books, etc. Caiaphas continued to be high priest during the 10 years of Pilate's sojourn, while Vitellius deprived him of his office shortly after Pilate departed for Rome. Although the above writings do not contain the name of Jesus, and here's a footnote here, down the bottom, in not referring to Christ, Josephus has but conformed to the policy of all Jews of his time. own time. For hundreds of years, even when the Christian religion was engaging the attention of the whole Greek and Roman world, Jewish writers continued to be silent upon the subject, or if they spoke of Christ and the Christians, it was in the most covert way, or secretive way. Although the above writings do not contain the name of Jesus or mention any of his followers, the reader will at once perceive that it is an extremely valuable part of the non-Christian testimony, and that it vouches for the truthfulness of the gospel, scriptures, right, setting, by testifying to the historical character of the Roman officials and Jewish high priests who, the evangelists tell us, played such a tragic part in the history of the Master, or Jesus the Christ. Accounts of customs, sex, dates, sex, S-E-C-T-S, not the other one, dates, etc., and Josephus correspond and at least in the main agree with what we find in the New Testament. In fact, we have the whole historical background of the four Gospels and of a portion of the Acts before us when we read the Antiquities of Josephus, books 16 to 20. Herod the Great, Archelaus his son, Herod Antipas, Herodias, her daughter Salome, John the Baptist, Annas, Caiaphas, Pontius Pilate, Felix and his Jewish wife Drusilla, Porcius Festus, Herod Agrippa, Bernice. Yeah, I'm sure that Bernice is the one that went to Rome or something, or went to Jerusalem. Yeah, went from Rome to Jerusalem and found those nails of Christ up on a hill or something like that, bits of wood or something like that. Yeah, I think she found either the nails or splinters of that cross, or maybe part of the cross, and became a Christian. Pharisees and Sadducees all appear in the history of Josephus and appear in the same relations to each other as we find them holding in the narrative of the New Testament. In accordance, so section 2, in accordance with the plan of this treatise, as stated in the preface, section 2 will be devoted to a summary of those facts which were brought to light in the foregoing study. One should keep in mind, while reading the following, that not a single statement in the whole account is drawn from Christian sources. So these people, or this author, etc., aren't referring to the Bible. They're not going like, okay, now we're going to turn to page chapter 6 in the book of Matthew or whatever, right? It's all coming from these non-Christian, non-Jewish sources. One should keep in mind while reading the following that not a single statement in the whole account is drawn from Christian sources, and that all doubtful passages purporting to be from the pen of non-Christian writers have been rejected, nor has use been made of passages which, although undoubtedly genuine, come to us from the works of early Christian writers. That many of these latter are authentic, there can be no doubt whatever. Nevertheless, it has been thought best not to make use of them in building up a history which claims to be entirely independent of Christian sources. The writers quoted above and the passages given under their names are entirely above the suspicion of being influenced by Christianity, and therefore best serve the present purpose. Nothing, therefore, will be found in the following narratives which cannot be found in the witness of Tacitus, Pliny the Younger, Lucian and Josephus. All important passages in the extracts from these writers have been numbered, and corresponding numbers have been placed after the passages, dependent upon them in the following. Should the reader therefore question our right to make, this author's right to make any assertion found below, he is only to discover in the text of the witnesses that number which corresponds with the number attached to the sentence about which he is in doubt, and he will learn our grounds for doing so. The Gospel of Jesus Christ according to Jews and Pagans. In the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea and Herod was tetrarch of Galilee, but Herodias Agrippa's sister, who now lived as wife to that Herod, who was tetrarch of Galilee and Perea, etc. Antiquities, book 18, chapter 7:1. And his brother Philip, tetrarch of Trachonitis, that's where he went to. He, Herod the Great, also gave Galenitis and Trachonitis and Pudnes to Philip, who was a son but brother to Archelaus by the name of a tetrarchy, in Tickle's book 17, chapter 8, verse 1. There was one John whom men called the Baptist, and there's a reference number probably to information in the appendix at the back of this book. He was a good man and exhorted the Jews to exercise virtue by acting righteously towards men and with piety towards God, and having thus done to come to baptism. The people were much moved by his teachings and came about him in crowds, until Herod began to grow jealous of the great power which he, John, was gaining over their minds. And he thought they might start a rebellion and take over his kingship, kill him off and all that sort of stuff. It's just like his father, right? Scared that this baby Christ would grow up and take over his kingdom, right? And rule in his place. So he got paranoid. Herod was at this time living with the wife of his brother Philip. He's an adulterer. This was of course unlawful, as Philip was still alive. The woman's name was Herodias, and she had a daughter named Salome. Perceiving that John had such influence over the multitude, Herod judged it best to have him seized. When this had been done, he sent him to the castle of Machaerus as a prisoner, and there had him put to death. Basically what we've already read about this person, John the Baptist, and that after Christ's death and ascension, resurrection and ascension, these followers of the Christ continued on with their religion, still believing in him, even though he was dead and gone. And they all looked upon death as a matter of small consequence. This attitude was the natural outcome of a conviction that they would live forever, eternally, right? Have eternal life. For a like reason, they despised the things of the world and regarded them merely as common property, for it had been impressed upon them that they were all brothers from the moment they converted, right, and accepted the Christ as their Saviour, Lord and Master, having forsaken the gods of the heathen, or the pagan gods, and the ones of the Romans, declared by the Senate as gods, and the statues said to be worshipped. Worshipped their crucified sophist and lived in accordance with his laws. They turned and, having forsaken the gods of the heathen, worshipped their crucified sophist and lived in accordance with his laws, etc. They were accustomed to meet together upon an appointed day, etc., etc. They had books also, and it was customary for their teachers to expound these and comment upon them. We've actually read this in the earlier account. Okay, it's about Nero burning Rome. Conclusion. Surely this is a most remarkable history. There is no trace of any other thing similar to it in the history of the world. In the light of sober reason, are we not bound to confess that the only thing which could explain such a state of affairs would be the advent into the world of one who lived such a life as the Gospels claim for Jesus, and taught at least similar lessons to those which he is said to have given to men? There is little to be added. We have seen that sometime between 26 and 37 AD a man was put to death in Judea by the Roman proconsul. He was a Jew. Well, he was under Jewish law, the Mosaic law, etc., etc., right? As all the other Jews were. He was actually a Galilean, but still regarded as a Jew, right? And was put to death by a method considered as that time suited only to the lowest criminals, robbers, thieves, etc., all put up on a crucifix, justly punished, him being innocent. We learn that almost immediately after his execution, a body of people sprang up who affirmed that this crucified Jew was God. It is evident that by professing this belief, men endangered their lives, and it is equally evident that they could reap no material profit by pursuing such a course. And yet, in spite of the humiliating death of Christ, and in spite of the torture and death awaiting his followers, or them, anyone that followed him, the sect of the Christians increased and spread with marvellous rapidity. It gathered adherents or followers from all ranks and various nations, Greeks, Romans, etc., etc., because these disciples, apostles, travelled all over and spread the good news of Christ, the revelations of Christ. They despised the things of the world, they loved each other, they died for Christ's namesake, they martyred, right? They died for what they believed in, the faith, right? And they conquered the world by their devotion. The Roman government pronounced Christianity a religio illicita, or illegal, a legal religion or practice, and Roman officials received orders to stamp it out. Then for more than 200 years the Christians suffered from the hatred of the world, Rome, etc., etc. Rulers attacked them with the sword and strove to annihilate them, completely wipe them out. Philosophers and scholars attacked them with the pen and strove to show the foolishness of their faith. And what happened? The Christians conquered the world by their very unworldliness, and before 300 years had elapsed after the slaying of Christ, a Christian emperor sat upon the throne of the Caesars. But was he really a Christian? Is it talking about Constantine, who was actually a pagan posing as Christian? You'd mix both, right? If that's the one they're talking about. This and what followed through the centuries is history. What tribe was able to resist him? What place was so remote that his followers did not enter it? Or what mountain range so high that it stopped their advance? It's talking about these disciples, these apostles, these followers of the Christ. In those days, the north of Europe was covered with vast tracts of forest inhabited by savage tribes, which were continually at war with each other and propitiated their deities with human sacrifices, or tried to appease their wooden, stone, straw gods of the imagination. When life was getting a bit tough, oh, here we go, we'll just kill this guy and chuck him on there as a way to ease the wrath upon us from these gods, the anger, right? And so forth. Men drank their liquor from cups fashioned out of the skulls of their unconquered enemies and slaughtered whole towns, men, women and children, from the very joy of bloodshed and the hopes of gain. Christians say that Christ claimed to be the light of the world. Whether the claim be true or not, each man must judge. This much we know, that with the gospel of Christ, light dawned upon the hearts of our fierce and bloodthirsty forefathers. Believing that Christ had suffered for them, they dared not be unmerciful as before. With the story of the gospel came the vision of tender and unselfish love. Little by little their hard hearts were softened. Gradually they learned love for their fellows. The old life became distasteful to them. The barbarities of war began to give way to nobler occupations. Today, what do we find? Much that is evil, doubtless, much selfishness still, and pride, and love of power, and money, all that is glitter and is gold. But these are the fading shadows of the night. The sun has risen, the light is growing, but down in the valleys there is darkness still. Yet, because there is darkness here and there, let us not say that it is still night. Historians, both Christian and non-Christian, with one accord, tell us that the light is steadily growing. Only the shallow-minded and those unacquainted with the history keep crying that the world grows more and more evil. Students of social economics tell us that never in the history of the world has there been such an era of philanthropic activity. Never has man felt such a deep responsibility for the welfare of his fellow man, or striven so unselfishly to assist him or help him. Again, we are certain, knowing full well, that every historian and student of human affairs will attest the truth of the assertion that the light is growing brighter and brighter, and with each new century, every century evil practice become impossible which were countenanced in the century preceding. What is the reason of this advance? Some answer this question one way, and some in another. One thing is certain, namely that the members of the Christian community, as described in sections 1 and 2, were manifestly controlled by sentiments absolutely in contradiction to the sentiments of the people among whom they were living. That the faith which they professed gave them a remarkable power of rising superior to the opposition and the corrupting influences of the age in which they lived, and that in their conception of mutual obligation, helpfulness and brotherly love, we see the first sign of that attitude toward humanity which must lie at the root of all advance, and which is recognized as the truest sign of civilization. We cannot fully understand what an astounding contrast the Christian outlook presented to that of the pagan world in the first century of the Christian era, unless we have some conception of the state of awful corruption. We cannot fully understand what an astounding contrast the Christian outlook presented to that of the pagan world in the first century of the Christian era, unless we have some conception of the state of awful corruption into which Greek and Roman society had fallen. Mass orgies, etc., etc. It was just becoming so wicked, and apparently Rome grew weak, and they were attacked on all sides. There was rebellion from within, etc. The literature of the period was cynical in tone and full of the most shameless obscenity. The masses were entirely illiterate, and no provision was made for the education. So all these Caesars, they were too busy claiming that they were gods, from the gods, all this sort of stuff, all powerful, and they did every wicked abomination. They enjoyed it, right? And just got fat and lazy by the looks of it. The masses were entirely illiterate, and no provision was made for the education. In the cities, a large proportion of the population consisted of slaves who were looked upon as the property of their masters. Slave owners could beat, torture, or kill their slaves, and the law proclaimed this to be within their rights. Not too sure on that one, because there was some decrees and protections put in place, like if a person was a minor, underage, you couldn't mess with them. There's like some sort of necklace or something that the Romans saw. This is what we're remembering from our personal research into their history, that you couldn't touch them. It was against the law to touch them until they came of age. That sort of thing. Slaves were bought and sold in the open market like cattle. Well, that could possibly be in reference to Roman-born citizens, children, women, men, etc. Okay, so here, slave owners could beat, torture, or kill their slaves, and the law proclaiming this to be within their rights. So that's the difference between servants, Jewish servants, and their slaves. There's a difference between servant and slave. So maybe the Romans had the same sort of idea. If you went Roman, you're a slave, and you can get beaten up, tortured, all that sort of stuff, and nobody could do a thing. It was their right to do such. Slaves were bought and sold in the open market like cattle. As porters, they were chained in front of the gate, just as with us, a watchdog, and at night they were shut up in the gastula like animals in stalls. So it's some sort of cage or a pen or something. Like them, they were also branded and marked. They were also flogged and crucified, often on the smallest provocation. Just for any reason. Oh, you smiled, so off you go to be flogged. Generally, the old and diseased were turned off without concern, or were killed outright as men kill a brute beast, or they're no use to them. You're too old, you're useless, so whop, you're dead. So long as there was hope of profit from them, they were spared, and when they died, they were cast into a pit with dead animals. A bit like the Jews and Gehenna. You're a thief, you're criminal, killed, your corpse chucked over the wall on this continuing fire with your dead trees, dead animals, etc. Kept burning and kept stacked, burned night and day sort of thing. So long as there were hope for a profit from them, they were spared if they had money, right? And when they died, they were cast into a pit with dead animals. So with these Romans, if they could make $1 out of them, or a denarii or whatever it was, then they might keep them alive. There were exceptions to these barbarities. A refined gentleman like Pliny the Younger shows great consideration for his own domestic slaves, and there are constant references to kindly treatment. But the terrible slave wars show to what desperation the slaves were driven, and the general picture of the times is one of cruelty and vice in connection with slavery. Yes, the Romans were very hard, very mean. Like, people would grow crops, they'd take basically all of it. Poor priesthood can't survive, they'd take it all in taxes, right? And it takes them even more and more and more. So how the heck could these people survive and live on? The cruelty and hard-hearted selfishness were only surpassed by the luxury and immortality. Small wonder that a note of consternation is apparent in the writings and speeches of the great men of the period. At the time when Nero was emperor, Seneca was a leading statesman and scholar of Rome. He thus describes the times in his day. All things are full of iniquity and vice. More crimes are committed than can be remedied by force. A monstrous contest of wickedness is carried on. Daily the lust of sin increases. Daily the sense of shame diminishes. Casting away all regard for what is good and honourable, pleasure runs riot without restraint. So there's no limit. Vice no longer hides itself, it stalks forth before all eyes. So public has iniquity become. So mightily does it flame up in all hearts, that innocence is no longer even rare. It has altogether ceased to exist. Even religion had become a cloak for the vilest immorality. The priestesses in the temples were prostitutes. Is that the Roman church temples or the Jewish ones? Because we did read about them having prostitutes, but we did read that they were male, but they could have been priestesses who were prostitutes, as it states here in that particular temple, and made no attempt to conceal it. Maybe it's actually talking about the Roman ones. When vice can walk abroad unashamed, it is not difficult to understand the degree to which a nation has fallen. Yeah, we think they're talking about the Roman temples. The geographer Strabo says that in the temple of Venus in Corinth there were more than 1,000 prostitutes. They had great privileges and sometimes presented to the goddess the vows and prayers of the city. This was also the state of affairs in the temple at Eryx in Italy, where even Roman consuls and praetors participated in the vileness of those wicked deeds, wicked acts, indulgences, etc. So great was the depravity of the age that the Roman government found it necessary to pass special laws prohibiting women of high rank from registering themselves as public prostitutes. This they were in the habit of doing in order to be able to give unbridled rein to their evil passions. The pastimes and pleasures of the people offer another indication of the depth to which they had fallen. They show that the Romans at the beginning of the Christian era had become wholly unnatural and depraved in their taste. Simple and manly sports no longer attracted them. Nothing was interesting without the shedding of blood and the spectacle of death. High and low, rich and poor, flocked to the amphitheatre to see men killed by wild animals or pitted against each other in mortal combat. For the condemned criminals were trained in the schools attached to the various circuses, and upon great festivals were forced to kill each other to satisfy the unnatural craving for blood. As it may be supposed, such customs had a most demoralizing effect upon the public, rendering them day by day more brutal in disposition. The plays of the period also had a most evil effect. Their obscene character doubtless played a very distinct part in bringing about the moral degradation of the peoples of Rome itself. Contrast with this dark picture of cruelty, luxury and vice the account of the Christian sect, as we have it in section 2. Are we not justifying in saying that the contrast is truly astounding? What is the spectacle we see? A vast civilization containing within itself all the elements of decay or rot, arrayed against a small community, strong in nothing but its devotion to its crucified founder and its obedience to his command. Legislation or law could not destroy it, no decrees could destroy it. When its members were tortured and killed, it only grew the more. It thought lightly of those things which the world loved and longed for the death which the world feared, because they knew what they'd have after that: eternal life, the crown of life, and live forever with Christ in the kingdom or the heavens. The ancient customs and religions which had been unable to hinder the decay of the countries under their sway fell one by one before the new faith. So all these pagan secular religions fell to the side because they probably were converted to this Christian faith or Christianity. The accounts in the first and second sections shows how Christianity was received by the pagan world. We have only to read history to see how paganism fell before it. There was something in the new religion which made it different from other faiths or other beliefs, secular religions. The non-Christian Roman statesmen knew that they must give it no quarter, or it would carry everything before it. The historian Lampridas, himself a pagan, writes of the emperor. Scriptures, history, Augustus Lamprid, etc. down here. And he talks about it. This is a remarkable passage. What could the state of religion of the Roman Empire have to fear from this strange faith, the distinctive doctrine of which was devotion to a crucified Jew and faith that he was the Son of God? Yet, has not history proved that she had good reason to fear? And what has resulted from the entrance of Christianity into the world? Whether Christ has been truly the light of the world, each man will have to decide personally. and as the facts of history are before us, we can judge for ourselves, and so forth. In countries where Christianity has been accepted, but the New Testament has not been put into the hands of the common people, there has been progress indeed, but progress nothing like so rapid as in other parts of Christendom. There have been men of the noblest devotion, movements showing in wonderful ways the Christian spirit, but a tendency to stagnation among the masses of the people, and a backwardness in economic and educational evolution. Probably because they're role players, they're not the real deal, and so forth. And it has something here about Japan. The philanthropic and educational institutions of the Christian West have been the pattern for everything of the kind in Japan. I say the Christian West, or the author says Christian West, because history shows us that almost every philanthropic venture of importance was first conceived and undertaken in the West by Christians. And now let us turn to India. India, the land of deep religious thought and earnest spiritual aspiration. It is as natural to be religious in India as to live and breathe and eat. It is a land of saints and sages, gurus, etc., and everywhere one meets those who are hungering for God. Atheism can find but little footing here in India, for most men recognize that the search for spiritual truth is the highest pursuit of man. Moreover, India is the land of the Vedas, probably the most ancient religious compositions in existence. Okay, these are probably the modernized versions of those original ancient Hindu, etc. religions. So there's possibility that they believed in one God way back there in its origins, and then somebody's perverted it, corrupted it, and they started believing in a pantheon of gods, blue with 6 arms, etc., etc. That's a possibility that we read. So you'd have to go do your research on those original ancient Indian religions to see if there was a vast change from monotheism in India to polytheistic, or a pantheon of, say, 33,000 different gods. India is the land of the Vedas, probably the most ancient religious compositions in existence. While we of the West were wandering in the forests clad in skins, the sages of India were deep in their search for the eternal verities of the spiritual world. Systems of philosophy were built up and gave place to other systems. One thinker followed another, each leaving his contribution to the religious history of his people. Yet, where is India today? We are told that in the Vedic age India was in her glory. There was no dishonesty, no impurity or pride or jealousy among the people. Wow, that's quite brilliant. So there might have been something in India in those particular religions, with that belief system, or the variants there. There was no dishonesty, no impurity or pride or jealousy among the people. The Brahmins lived simply, austere and religious lives. The kings were brave and upright and faithful as Janaka, while probably certain sects did, if this is true. But what about the ones that supposedly ran and chased Thomas, the disciple, to a certain rock and then ran him through with a spear? Apparently they were Brahmins, zealous Brahmins. Probably because of that religion at that time. He was encroaching on theirs, and the people were believing him, following him, leaving their religions in droves. There's always a reason behind it. The Brahmins lived simple, austere and religious lives. The kings were brave and upright and faithful as Janaka. Women were as pure and loving as Sita. Sons were as obedient as Rama. Younger brothers were as dutiful as Bharata and Lakshman. The forests were full of saints and rishis. The dwellers in the towns were devoted to religion. Divine wisdom was among them in the form of the Vedas. Yet, where is India today? The Vedas are said to contain the perfect and final wisdom of God. How could those who possessed this final wisdom come under the dominion of error and delusion? As we suggested, maybe somebody corrupted those religions at a later point, a later millennia or centuries. Are we to believe that even the perfect revelation of God himself will be unable to keep us from degeneration and degradation? Even suppose we again attain to that perfect condition of society which is said to have existed in Vedic times, how can we hope to continue in it? Good question. If we have enjoyed it once and then fallen from it, what will prevent us from again falling into degrading after having attained to perfection a second time? Well, it gives you time to ponder, to rethink, where did I go wrong? Why did I go wrong? How can I not go wrong next time? If this be true, who would blame India for settling down in torpor and inertia, or idleness, laziness, right? Why strive if we know that the attainment of our ideal is to be followed by another period of degeneration and decay? The saints of all countries and all ages have impressed upon our minds that we are not to set our mind upon things fleeting and temporal, but upon those things which are eternal. If the perfection to which we are hoping to attain be only temporal, followed by more degeneration and decay, why strive for it? If it is only temporal, why long for it? It is here that the great contrast lies. So it's a total commitment to it, total focus, brand new mindset, determination, concentration, focus, right? That you are going to follow this, you can follow it. Yeah, perfectly. Hindu religious history, if we are to accept the claims of those who assert that there was perfection in the Satyug, presents a spectacle of a people living in a state of spiritual and social perfection, and blessed with the full revelation of God, yet gradually falling from that high estate and degenerating spiritually and socially until they have reached their present position, which they call the Kali Yuga. On the other hand, take the history of Christianity as we find it in this book, independently of Christian records. It does not claim to have first revealed itself to a perfected society. The world had never been in a more evil condition than at the time it first made its appearance. According to Hindu belief, God's wisdom as revealed in the Vedas was unable to save man from falling under the power of delusion and degradation. I would say there was a balance. You have to have evil, you have to have evil to balance that good, good to balance that evil. Probably something like that. According to Hindu belief, God's wisdom as revealed in the Vedas was unable to save man from falling. It's probably because of the state of man himself, inward man, under the power of delusion and degradation. According to the history of Christianity, all the forces of evil, the wisdom of the world, the material Roman Empire, the hatred and contempt and persecutions of the masses were unable to hinder the spread of the Christian faith. As a light dispelling the darkness that came with its higher ideals and loftier manner of life. Wherever it found root, it seemed to bring new life, with the promise of new life. The messengers of the gospel of peace traversed the great forest which before had echoed to the tread of marauding armies. The latter had gone in their strength to kill and take captive. The former went in their weakness, not to kill, but if need be, to die for their faith. Yet in the end, it was not the Roman legions which conquered the Germanic tribes, but the gospel of Christ, or tamed them. This too is history, as all who read may know. Throughout Europe and America, as we have already pointed out, spiritual, mental and material progress are most evident where the New Testament is most treasured and read. To put it in a few words, if Vedic times were perfect times, the Hindu position has been the Vedas and a steady degeneration. The position of Christianity, according to history, has been the New Testament and steady progress toward the light. The history of Hinduism, according to both Sanyatin, Dharmists and Arya Samajists alike, has been from light to darkness. The history of Christianity has been from darkness into an ever increasing light, and so forth. And the last is Celsus the Epicurean, who without doubt was the most formidable of the literary opponents of Christianity in the 2nd century. His attacks upon the Christian religions are marked by a spirit of great hostility, and his method of approaching the subject shows that he was a man of keen and vigorous intellect. His book was called The True Discourse. It is only known from Origen's reply to it, but as Origen quotes his adversary's words, and answers them point by point, we may gather the original works of Celsus from his pages. This apology of Origen is the greatest of the apologies. Eusebius, who they theologians, scholars, etc., say, yeah, this guy can't really be trusted 100%. Says of it, at this time also he composed in 8 books a reply to that work written against us by Celsus, the Epicurean, bearing the title The True Doctrine. The work of Celsus was written some 80 years before Origen's answer to it, or about 80, 170. We can only touch upon a few of the points taken up by Celsus, so we suggest you go do some research on Celsus, the final in this book. That's your homework. Okay, and it's got all these references to him and what he did, and possibly how he may have converted sometime later. Maybe not. And here is what we feel pretty important, because in one of our videos before we talked about Ptolemy, Serapis Christus, Soter, and this brotherhood or cult of Serapis Christus. And this is part of the text of a letter from the Emperor Hadrian to Silvanus in about 34 or 134 AD, probably 134 AD. Hadrianus Augustus Silvanio Consuli Salutum Egyptum quam mihi laudabas, etc. It's probably in Latin. Yeah, it's in Latin. Translation: Hadrian Augustus greets Silvanus the consul. This is Hadrian the emperor. Built Hadrian's wall. My very dear Silvanus, Egypt, of which you spoke so highly, I have found to be light, fickle, fluttering at every touch of rumour. Those who profess to worship Serapis are Christians, and those who call themselves Christian bishops are devotees of Serapis. There is not a ruler of a Jewish synagogue there. There is not a Samaritan. There is not a Christian presbyter who is not a wizard or a soothsayer or a scoundrel of some sort. Pressure is put on the patriarch himself when he comes to Egypt, on the one hand to adore Serapis, on the other Christ. As a race, they are full of sedition, vanity and spite. The community is opulent, rich, fruitful, without a man of leisure in it. Cash is their only god. So that religion of the Serapis Christus, the brotherhood of Serapis Christus, was wicked. It was unrighteous. It was all about money. Money was the god. But Piscus was one of those 6 authors who are called Historiae Augustae Scriptores. He was born in Syracuse, etc., etc. Phlegon was one of Hadrian's freedmen, who wrote a number of books on various subjects, of which some fragments only remain. One thing is most probable, that whether the letter is truly from the hand of Hadrian or not, it was edited by one who lived during his rule, AD 117 to 138. We may therefore feel justified in believing that we are in possession of a non-Christian document written by someone either during or at most shortly after Hadrian's time, in which distinct mention is made of Christian bishops and presbyters. The patriarch is the Jewish patriarch of Tiberias. Lightfoot, who is one of the greatest modern authorities on the subject, writes with regard to the letter, this document is considered genuine by such opposite authorities as Tillemont, History of the Emperors 2, page 265, and Gregorius, LC, page 41, and may be accepted without hesitation. Appendix 4, the Aelius Lampredus, writing upon the reign of Elagabalus, AD 118 to 222, relates how the emperor made plans for a temple on the Palatine hill in which he might collect together all the cults of the various Roman gods, and thither also he intended to transfer the Jewish and Samaritan religions and the Christian devotions, that he, Elagabalus, might be priest of them, and so forth. Okay, so that's the end of that book. It just suddenly ended there, but look at it. Okay, that was the appendix, that's one. So yeah, that's quite interesting. Go back there, we just saw something. Hadrian Augustus greets Silvanus the consul. My very dear Silvanus, Egypt of which you spoke so highly I found to be light, fickle, etc. Okay, we already covered that. But them adoring Serapis, and in other days the Christ. So it's kind of weird, right? 1 minute they're into Serapis worship, and then next day they're into Christ. Weird. When was that? 134 AD or something? Presbyter. There is not a Christian presbyter who is not a wizard or soothsayer or a scoundrel of some sort. Pressure is put on the patriarch himself. He's the head of that particular movement. When it comes to Egypt, on the one hand to adore Serapis, on the other Christ. As a race they are full of sedition, vanity and spite. The community is opulent, rich, fruitful, without a man of leisure in it. So it's saying there basically every man's a man of leisure within it. Cash is their only god, or coin. So we hope that this has opened your eyes to the Christ through these many non-Jewish, non-Christian writers: Josephus, Tacitus, Eusebius, Pliny the Younger, and so forth.